short months ago, I posed a question.
Is UV the future of Python packaging?
Which I answered with a convinced
maybe.
Fast forward to August 20th, 2024, where Astral, the makers of UV, dropped UV 0.3.0 and the Python community is still buzzing with excitement. So of course, I had to play with the new features immediately, open GitHub issues and pester Astral on their own Discord. So today, I'm happy to report back to answer my own question. And of course, the short answer that is already part of the title is not very interesting. Yes, I think it's the future, but I didn't put on my good shirt for that. The more interesting part is, why do I think it's the future? When looking through my two lenses of a back-end DevOps engineer writing and deploying mostly web-based applications at a small web hosting company and domain registrar, and as a burned out open source maintainer of widely used Python packages that currently rake in around 300 million monthly downloads. And of course, I also need to talk about what's missing in UV to be not just the future of Python packaging, but also the present of Python packaging and how likely it gets fixed anytime soon. And finally, there's been some angst and gloom around how and by whom UV is developed, and I need to address those too while at it. But before I dive into what's changed since March 2024, let me give you a super quick summary for the uninitiated of what UV actually is. UV is a Python packaging tool written in Rust, which makes it blazingly fast, and it has the very nice property of being one binary blob that never breaks. The goal is no less than becoming the only tool you need when working with Python project. Astral, the developers of UV, specifically say that they want to become the Cargo of Python, Cargo being the all-in-one tool for Rust. Back in March, when I made my first video on UV, and feel free to watch it since it gives you a lot of historic context on Python packaging, and that may be really helpful to understand whether or not UV is a big deal. They were far away from that goal. All they did back then was to re-implement virtualenv to create virtual environments, pip to install packages into them, and pip-tools to recursively pin dependencies into the iconic requirements.txt files, but only for the current Python version, current architecture, and current operating system, which, as I said back in March, was absolutely nothing new. But also, as I said back then, it is good software engineering. First, nail the basics, and then start adding more abstraction layers, which they now did. And blessedly, they didn't start adding features on top of these essentials, but they kept them tucked away in the UV pip and UV-venv namespaces for us and actually other tools too to use. So now with their 0.3.0 release, they got a lot more ambitious. And they took aim at replacing workflow tools like PDM or Poetry or even their in-house RAI. And that's where this video starts for real. So let's talk about what's so exciting now in UV land. And I'm not gonna beat around the bushes. It's a simple fact that UV is now a complete workflow tool, which you may remember I called Python's biggest point of criticism in my last video. Everybody wants a cargo or an NPM for Python, but what does that mean exactly? It means that under perfect circumstances that get wider with every UV release, UV is the only tool you have to install on your computer to work with Python projects or just to run Python scripts. And I'm not exaggerating when I say only tool, because UV will go as far as downloading a Python interpreter from Gregory Schurtz's standalone Python builds for you, which are an amazing feat of engineering. There are single directories with a complete Python installation within them, and you can drop them anywhere on your system and they just work. Meaning you don't have to install Python to work with Python. And of course, UV is not the first workflow tool to do this for you, because Hatch, PDM and RAI, they did this all before. What's special now is that they all in on them together with virtualenvs, because those Python installations are not even global. There's no global Python command for you that you can run from your shell. Instead, they're used by UV transparently when it needs to create a virtual environment or run a command. And I mean, you can manage them manually using the UV Python subcommand, but you don't have to. And of course, this can add more nodes to the infamous Python environment xkcd. But in an ideal world, new Python programmers won't have to deal with any of this ever again. But I do have to add a little caveat here, because I personally do not use those standalone builds. Never. Firstly, building them currently means fighting Python that emphatically does not want to be built into standalone installations. And that causes a bunch of quirks. And I just hope that for most people, the quirks are better than this. And then maybe some of their patches get upstream eventually, so the quirks will get fewer. But also secondly, when deploying to production, for example in Docker containers, I don't want a download from GitHub to be part of my build pipeline. Security aside, GitHub is sometimes down. But of course, Astral thought of that and allows you to run a local mirror of those Python versions by setting the uv python install mirror env variable. But that is currently, for myself, too much work for too little gain. And to preempt, the obvious question is gonna come now. I personally use the official builds from python.org on macOS, which I keep updated with my friend Glyph's mopup utility. Oh, was that a teaser? And my other friends, Anthony Sotilis Deadsnake PPA on our Ubuntu servers that we, of course, have an internal mirror of. And since it's our platform, we also use them in our Docker containers. And of course, I will link all of this in the description below. Now, even though I'm not using this feature to install Python versions, it comes with one really cool sub-feature that's useful for everybody, even for myself, that I really need to call out, and it's uv python list. And this inconspicuous command will look at your paths and give you a list of active Python installation, which is absolutely perfect to debug this situation. Now, while bootstrapping a system for Python usage is really cool and useful, this is just a preamble. The much more interesting feature is the concept of projects and its crown jewel, a cross-platform log file called uv.lock that lives at the root of your project. That means we now have only one log file that I can use while developing on ARM macOS and deploying to Intel Linux. And more importantly, I can create that log file on any platform for any other platform. So no more pip compile in Docker containers anymore. Sadly, since Brett's PEP, despite Astral's participation, didn't make it in time, they had to use their own format for now. Therefore, this is, if I'm counting correctly, the third mainstream cross-platform log file format after PDM and Poetry and now UV. But I don't care anymore because it works great, so whatever. It comes with the usual convenience functions like uv add or uv delete to add and delete dependencies, but the core are two top-level commands, uv.lock and uv.sync. And they do exactly what you'd expect them to do. But puts them apart though is that these are high-level features. And you can see how important they are to Astral because they put them right into the top-level namespace of UV. And since they're high-level, they do what one would expect them to do, what the correct thing is to do. So for instance, if you check out a UV-based project and change into its directory and call uv.sync, what happens? Does it break your global Python installation? Does it error out because it doesn't know what Python to use? Does it crash because there is no virtualenv? Or bonus option, does it error out opaquely because Homebrew updated something? None of that. It looks into your PyProject.toml at the Python requires key and for a .python version file and picks the most likely correct Python version. And these are both standards that are widely used in the Python community. If necessary and not forbidden to do so, it will also download the missing Python interpreter as said before. Then it creates a virtualenv called .venv with the Python interpreter and installs all dependencies, including development dependencies, into the virtualenv. Done. It's all there. You can start running and coding right away. And since uv.sync is so fast, I made it part of my beloved dependency env.rc files that get executed whenever I enter the directory. And this is a less obvious point that Astral's Charlie Marsh tries to make whenever he gets a chance. UV is not a little bit faster than comparable tools. It's also not a lot faster, it's categorically faster. uv.sync is faster than git status if there's no changes and the cache is hot. And most of us are okay with calling git status after every command for our cool shell prompts. So this enables a complete new set of approaches and workflows. Suddenly, recreating virtualenvs is essentially free. Deleting the project's virtualenv and calling uv.sync that will recreate it and install, in this case, 94 packages takes less than 200 milliseconds. So yeah, you can call uv.sync all the time, but you don't have to. Admittedly, I'm a bit old school because I like to activate my virtualenvs and I like to be able to run my Python scripts as regular CLI commands, which is one of the reasons why my applications are proper Python packages, which might be a topic for a future video, so hit the subscribe button to not miss it. But Astral has made clear many times that they do believe in virtualenvs, but they do not believe in activating them, which kind of makes sense because especially for newcomers, sourcing activation files or forgetting to do so has traditionally been a source of confusion. So instead, they gave us UV run. And I could produce a whole video about UV run because it's more of a multi-tool that can now even execute zip archive. But when used within a UV project directory, it will make sure that all dependencies are met and then run a command or package that you pass to it. And yeah, they don't support -m yet, so you have to do it a bit awkwardly like this. In practice, that means you don't have to ever run UV sync. I can check out any work project, cd into it and run uv run pytest and it just works. And everybody who's responsible for making less Python savvy people run Python code is crying right now. And that's okay, let it all out, it's over. Now, all this sounds suspiciously user-oriented. How does UV fare with production and or deployment pipelines? And as for the original 0.3, not so great. Clearly the focus here was wooing people with the awesome local workflows and kind of worked, right? But Astral worked on a breakneck pace ever since, and I was able to switch all our Docker containers to the UV sync-based workflows that are stable and fast as f. If you'd like to see how, I've written it down in my blog because that's just better for copying and pasting and actually keeping it updated. So at the risk of repeating myself, link in description. So, we've got a high-level workflow tool that most people love to use, that is fast and it is robust. And it has a very active support and development. But the key point here is we can give UV to newbies and they can start Pythoning right away and they will not hate it. And as much affection I carry for other tools, this is a milestone in Python's history. Now, on top of that, I could spend hours talking about UV's new features, like workspaces that help you with monorepos that I don't use, so I don't have a useful opinion on them. Like single script execution with embedded dependency information, as we already know from pip-x. Super useful for some people, I'm not one of them. Or like the whole UV tool feature set, including its convenience alias UVX, that is taking on pip-x in general. And a quick side note to PyPI admins, since UVX is equivalent to pip-x run, not just pip-x, it might make sense to give the seemingly abandoned run project some better protection. I've accidentally run it myself many times. I mean, if there's anything concrete y'all would like me to talk about, drop it into the comments. But I find it more valuable to talk about what's missing right now, at least for me. And this is the part of this video that has been extremely frustrating to write, because when I find faults, I report them. And I write rather slowly because, you know, I have a job and a rather rough life right now. And I had to rewrite this part several times now. So this ends here. I'm recording it and I will cut everything out that's not applicable anymore. So apologies for rough cuts. Here comes the list. So that's my list. And I hope you agree with me that everything I brought up is a big deal and needs to be fixed ASAP. Okay, just kidding. But the rewriting part is true, and I expect some of the following things get invalidated while I stare into Final Cut Pro in fact. Let's get started anyway, and I will start with what I think is the first thing people used to modern workflow tools will miss, and that's command runners. While UV run is incredibly powerful, there is no concept of a command runner in UV yet, where you assign names to commands that run inside of certain virtualenvs. For example, in PDM, I can assign pytest to the name tests. And now I can run pdm run tests and it just works. For my work, that's not a problem. I use just files in all my projects and across project types. So I don't need a Python-specific re-implementation of this functionality, given what UV run already can do. However, I'd like more control over virtualenvs, and I suspect that will require some kind of configuration anyway. I mean, I already can tell UV to run a certain command line with additional dependencies or even additional optional extra groups. But those extra dependencies go to the same single virtualenv at the root of my project called .venv. And it would be nice to have more than one, to be able to isolate those dependencies from each other. And where that's especially missing is in open source projects. Because of the two big multi-dimensional command runners, Tox and Nox, that I made a video about, so please check it out. Only Tox has grown support for uv.lock files, and only very recently at that, after I worked together with Bernard Gabor on it. And by working, I mean I was complaining and he was coding, which totally is the same thing. Relatedly, UV has the concept of development dependencies, which are dependencies that you use only in development, hence the name. And you control the installation by passing --nodev to UV sync or by not passing it. But UV only has one dependency group for development dependencies. And saying it like that sounds like a step back. However, development dependencies are not a first-class feature in Python packaging at all. What we usually do nowadays is that we abuse optional dependency groups to define our development dependencies, and they are usually called tests or docs. And that leads to some package browsers claiming that adders depends on things and similar nonsense. And as so often, there is a PAP underway to solve this, but there's nothing ready yet. Now, to be clear, you can still do this with UV, no problem. Nothing is taken away from you at all. But additionally, you can set tool.uv.dev dependencies to a list with your development dependencies that get automatically installed by UV sync unless told otherwise. But currently, this is a flat list. And it would be great if I could just define a special group for documentation that brings in heavy dependencies like things, or a bare bones one that just runs tests without development helpers like IPython. But currently, we can't. That said, if you look into uv.lock, you already can see that there's named groups in there. The list you currently define is assigned to the name dev. So this is totally coming, it's just unclear when. Finally, this is minor but might affect you, so it's more of a heads up. uv-tool/uvx are missing pip access -- include deps, which install executables from the package's dependencies. If you don't know what that means, it's fine, but it just means for you concretely that you can't use Ansible with uv-tool, but with pip-x you can. So these are the main things that still keep UV in the future for me and my particular needs. And I hope some of them are still relevant while I'm uploading this video. But either way, I think it's quite obvious that this is all just SMOPs. And Astral has shown to be really good at SMOPs. So I think it's a rather near future that this is gonna be the present. But where does all this leave us this time? UV is already excellent for local development. If you have a coworker who never used Python, you just tell them to install UV, check out your project and use UV run. There is no other step. UV is also great for application deployments. I'm successfully using it to build our Python containers and Python Debian packages. Again, check out my comprehensive blog post. However, currently, UV is not quite right there for typical open source projects. I'm not gonna go into details here because they're probably be outdated faster than I can edit this video, but the main thing that is missing currently is support in logs. Also, what's really easy to forget, tools like Dependabot will have to add support for UV's log format to spam us on the first of each month with a wave of PRs. And GitHub's track record at implementing new Python standards is not super great. Chris? That said, it's already great to make your CI pipelines faster, just by substituting pip calls with UV pip calls, or running your tools using UVX, like this line makes talks magically faster, or by using UV tool to quickly install Python tools and use them multiple times, which works great for coverage in GitHub Actions, like link in the description if you want to know how this works. And Astral has blessed an official setup UV GitHub action too, so it's getting more seamless by the day. Then of course, there's the criticism. Recently, there has been a mostly insightful thread on Mastodon that, together with a nice summary by Simon Willison, you know, the LLM guy, I'll link in the description. It boils down to two issues. One, the question whether foundational Python tools should be written in Rust, because as something, Rust as a lower level language has a higher maintenance cost and shrinks the pool of potential contributors. And while I personally am not a fan of writing Rust myself, I think this argument is invalid in 2024. There's tons of Rust-based foundational tools already, and there's a lot of Rust-savvy people in the Python community. I mean, just look at UV's and Rust contributor charts. Astral is 8 people. This looks very healthy for a project that hasn't been public for even a year. There's also the human question that I'm especially attuned to of how are we gonna treat the maintainers of the existing tools that put hundreds, if not thousands, hours of unpaid work into the most painful niche of Python. And I don't have a good answer for that, except maybe let's just not be assholes about it. I mean, don't tell people how happy you are that you don't have to use their software that was mission critical just a week ago anymore. And as I mentioned in my first UV video, a lot of the anger about Python packaging is misdirected. So just don't amplify clueless jerks. Then secondly, a more serious issue is that Astral is a venture capital funded company that will have to make money someday. And there's the fear that they'll create a monoculture with UV, which by the way is exactly what Python normies are asking for, and then do an evil rug pull because they run out of money and they're forced so by their evil VC overlords, which is not an unlikely scenario at all. I mean, Q, HashiCorp or Redis or CentOS or what have you. And that would suck. But I'm convinced we should expect that to happen. It's called risk management. Fortunately, UV is licensed under the MIT and Apache licenses, some of the most liberal ones, which means we will be able to fork them. And just like OpenTofu and Valkey exist, we will find a way forward. This is what open source licenses give us. We don't have to trust anyone. We just have to be okay with taking over one rainy day. And to me personally, the whole Astral thing seems like a genius thing to make VC investors pay for great Python tooling, so I'm super okay with that. So is UV the future of Python packaging? I think it is. It has the best shot at bringing in those who felt let down by the existing tooling while remaining flexible enough for the rest of us. They've got a best shot at becoming a great standard tool that we just can tell newbies to use without any asterisks around that. And to me, there's two main reasons for that. Firstly, they have the bandwidth of several exceptionally talented people working 8 hours a day on that. And secondly, they have the humility to listen and learn and aren't trying to force another NPM clone on us with conventions that make no sense in a Python community. They've got strong opinions on good design, but they've also got an open ear for the needs and workflows of the community. And oh boy, do they hear many of those. And this is not a given. As someone who also writes his fair share of Go, I'm keenly aware how many people in the Go community are still bitter about how a certain Google employee just threw away all community efforts to build consensus around packaging and emerged with his own stuff ex cathedra, and this is how it is now. And this is also the reason for me why I spent so much time playing with UV and going to the bug tracker and Discord and pestering Bernard on the Tox UV bug tracker instead of producing videos, because I think this is our shot at a really great packaging tool. I don't want to be the one coming whining afterwards about how it's not doing what I need to do. Is it the only future of Python packaging? I sure hope not. I think diversity of ideas and experiments are important for the health of a community. And leaving all innovation to one group of people working for the same company, that just means stagnation. And importantly, Astral did not come up with the ideas by sending Charlie Marsh to meditate on top of a mountain until packaging enlightenment struck. They are standing on the shoulders of giants, of tools that came before. I think I even smelled a little bit of build out in there, and of the thankless work that went into standardizing packaging by the PyPA that broke many souls. UV is the result of all of this, and we still need this. I hope it doesn't mean that we stop experimenting outside of Astral, because that would mean that we've somehow reached peak packaging, which, with all due respect to Astral and UV, would really be sad if true. And wow, this is all I got for you today. Sorry, this video took so incredibly long. My newsletter subscribers know that I had a both amazing and very rough summer, but I was delighted to see that my channel just kept growing anyway. So thank you everyone for watching my stuff. Please keep hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Special thanks to everyone who spared kind words in person at the various conferences I've been to lately. It was really heartwarming to hear all these nice things, and it was also a big part of motivating myself to get out of this slump and produce something away. Now, after seeing me talking this highly of UV, I feel I have to assure you that no goods were exchanged between Astral and myself, but there have been goods exchanged between my GitHub sponsors and me. Last time I started experimenting with giving the people who make these videos possible at all with some airtime. And it was well received, so this is a thing now. Given tax rules and etc., I don't plan on looking for ad pardons, sketchy VPN providers or overpriced supplements or not. But I will keep focusing on the people and corporations who like my work enough to give me no strings attached money to do more of it. So if you want to become one of them and maybe benefit from time-limited tiers, check out my GitHub sponsors page and you may see your name or even logo here, like those of my main benefactors. So firstly, of course, my employer Varimedia. Get your domains and hosting there if you speak German at all. Other than that, Tidelift, Klaviyo, File Previews and Polar are my main sponsors and I would like to thank them so much. Also big thanks to Daniel Fortunov, Kemin P. Fleming, Wim Jontin Glenn, Button Down, which is also hosting my newsletter, Christopher Digham, Stefan Hagen, Magnus Watten, David Kramer, Jesse Snyder, Revolux, Chris Withers, Mike Fiedler, Duncan Hill, Colin Marquardt and Peter Swinkles, and everybody else who decided my work is worth their actual money. I keep feeling incredibly humbled by that and I expect it to go away any day now. So thank you for supporting me. My video would not be possible without all of you. And as always, thank you everyone who watches all the way to the end. Please like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and see you hopefully sooner than last time.